All right. Well, hello everyone. I'm Tyler Williams. I'm with ForGround by Bayer. Today we're bringing to you a pretty cool weather outlook. I shouldn't say cool. I should say a pretty hot weather outlook, but hopefully you can stay cool during it. But bringing in Will Danby with BAM Weather, really just to try to provide some, kind of a little bit of a weather outlook for the summer, really focused around, a lot of the sustainable ag, regenerative ag farmers that we work with here in ForGround. And so we've been doing this for a number of months now, and really like being able to do this. So I'll first introduce Will. So Will Danby, meteorologist with BAM Weather. I'll maybe turn it over to you, Will, and you can talk a little bit about what BAM does and what you do, and as you kind of go through your forecast, I'm probably going to interrupt with questions because I always have questions, and hopefully they're relatable to the people watching on here. So Will, thanks for taking the time, and maybe just want to share a little about you, and then we can kind of get into the forecast.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, and as always, thanks for doing this here and choosing us to be partners with you guys. I think it's really awesome combining really like ideas here with kind of the meteorology and forecast aspects, as well as the agriculture and sustainable development approach too as well. And ultimately here with BAM, we're a private weather consulting company, and our main goal is to establish impactful, meaningful relationships with the end user, with our farmers, and more than that, we do service farmers and education industry as well as snow removal. But it's really important for us that people aren't left in the dark. They don't know what's coming. They don't know how they can prepare for just anything in terms of a growing season or just even what happens tomorrow in the weather. Automated data, it's excellent, but it only serves a purpose to an extent, and you don't get that human element in it, and that's crucial, especially in today's world here with the age of technology, to make sure we have that human element to add risks to forecasts, and that's where really a lot of the magic comes in here, and that's what we strive to do here with BAM, is establish those relationships and make those confident and informed decisions rolling forward for whatever your operation really is.
Yeah,
So I'm
that's great. Yeah, thanks. And yeah, that's really kind of what we're trying to do here is just to kind of hone in on the more specific type forecast. And so yeah, appreciate you calling that out. And anyway, yeah, I'll kick it back to you.
Awesome. So let's jump into this here, guys. I'm gonna kind of set the stage a little bit about what our main pattern driver is, and just like our last outlook here, we're talking about, it's called ENSO. It's the fancy word for what El Nino is and La Nina is, and it's in relation to how the equatorial Pacific, the sea surface temperatures act. They do oscillate between warmer than normal and cooler than normal, and that obviously has a very large impact here on the U.S. So I'm going to start off with things with this here, and then from that, this is kind of the overall arcing factor to a lot of the summer outlooks here. We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty details about month-to-month outlooks, some risks, as well as kind of areas where we think there can be some favorable growing conditions and areas where we may run into some concerns here rolling forward. So I'm going to start things off here just at the overall progression, and simply these blue bars here on this line graph just correlate to cooler. So think cooler here. This is the June 8th temperature anomaly from a few days ago. And the last time we did one of these reports here, I like to compare to where we've come from back in March here when we did the last one. But notice how much warmer the equator was here. We're looking at these two black regions. We're seeing that we're cooling down, and I like to think this as like a counterclockwise pump. We start cooling the shore of South America first, that moves and expands further west with time along the equatorial Pacific here. And that cooling process is going on right now, where in terms of a technical standpoint, we're on the very last limb of an El Nino still. I'd argue here really at almost any moment now we're kind of in a neutral state. And then in terms of when we really flip over to a La Nina feel in our atmosphere, I do think that that's still on par to come right around mid-August or so. I think that's when we really start to flip into that there. So I'm going to go ahead and skip through the kind of the regional seasonal out, or just the next 2 week outlooks here, and kind of just jump into first where we are with our crops, and then I'll get into really starting with June, and we'll go all the way through September here. So for people that are more sensitive here to kind of how we play out, averaged out as a whole for the growing, I have on the right here the corn yields versus the trend line, and then we have the soybean yields versus the trend line, and these yellow dots here indicate our favorite analog years. And you can see by and large we're pretty close to trend line here. There's nothing too notable with that, but in terms of the corn, I'd say the risk here is we're a little bit below that trend line. We're at negative 2.2 below that. And I think the main risk is going to be to the folks in the central plains as we get into July. I think there can be some concerns where we get into a hotter and drier pattern. I do think there can be some drought issues there. I think into the ag belt, we're going to have a very good start here, for at least into this forecast through June and July. Maybe could run into some issues here in August with some precipitation shutting off. So maybe the growing season could end a little bit sooner for some folks. But in terms of the soybeans, I think overall, I don't see too much of a problem with the soybeans here. I know a lot of us have gotten out there and gotten those out there and planted, but expecting somewhere around the trend line for that there. So as a whole here, if you're looking for the biggest and best crops, some spots I think can see that. I think we'll touch into that there. Northern Plains, I think we're looking very good this growing season. As a whole, I'd call the yields just. I think we're okay. We'll be decent here. I don't think there's concerns for a bad yield, but there's some things we need to watch out here. Well, and we'll get into that here in these next few slides. Here's just simply a look at anywhere from the past 3 months to 30 days here of where our deficit and budget is on soil moisture. We can see up here across the Northern Plains, this is where we're the wettest. We've had a pretty wet end of May and to the start of June, especially across Minnesota and Wisconsin. And this will certainly work in our favor to an extent. If some of you guys are already too wet out there, there can be some concerns, at least into the short term to end June. I think the pattern stays very active in the Northern Plains. Some areas here where again, some concerns can arise. We fortunately have had some active flow here work into the Central Plains. It is here. This is the aridity, just the overall soil moisture. It is still a little bit dry as a whole, but the surface has been saturated some with some rain here. But again, that concern is going to be coming into July for things to dry out here. We take a look at our drought monitor, and May really did a number for a benefit for especially Iowa. Now I do know that there's cases here where it was very wet in Iowa, and that may have mitigated some folks getting out there to plant earlier, but that drought has since really eroded, and we're still only dealing with that across Kansas right now. If we can compare this to the Northern Plains, started out very dry early in the spring. We've since eroded that there, even up into the Canadian prairies. It was drier. And look at the class change on this. You can see we've become very wet across a lot of the corn dense areas here across the ag belt, northern Iowa, and southern Minnesota. So things have flipped wet. Yes, it was very wet in May, but I think this overall in the long term is actually going to help us from a budget point of view rolling forward here. So let's go ahead and get into really the end of June, the start of July, where we're going to progress from there. I do think right now, at the time we're recording this, it's pretty seasonable across the Ohio Valley, pretty seasonable across the Northern Plains, so actually running a little bit cooler than normal. I would say actually the risk to this is that towards the shorter term, the beginning of this period, maybe June 21st through about the 28th, is maybe the Northern Plains can actually be a little bit cooler than what this suggests. towards about above normal with a slightly near seasonable risk here. And then one thing to note is as this heat starts to expand, there's a near-term storm system we're watching for. It's June 22nd to 26th, and from a progression standpoint, I think that's what's going to really starting to expand some of this heat towards the north and the east. I think early on in this period, kind of June 21st as well through the 27th, we can get some flow into the central plains. So I think this above normal here, let me go ahead and draw this in. I think in mid-June here, we can get some flow here. And with time, the concern is this starts to lift more north, and things begin to dry out here across the central plains. This heat starts to work its way here and lift north as we approach more to the Independence Day into July 4th. And I think it would be kind of post that 22nd to 26th period here that we can talk potential for an earlier heat wave across the central U.S. There are some signals that can suggest that there is something to watch. I'm going to go ahead here, and that will bring us now into our July temperature and precipitation outlooks. A lot of the main drivers, I'll get into this, are again, that El Nino waning into that eventual La Nina. I think we're still feeling a neutral state here. We're in that interchange and that transition. And another large driver is actually going to be offshore from the west coast. The Pacific waters, actually, this is north of the equator, just offshore from the west coast of the U.S. Those waters are actually quite cool. They're cooler than normal, and there is a correlation with that. It's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and that's a period there with the decadal, the kind of the 10-year oscillations where this can flip from being cooler waters and warmer waters, and essentially these cooler waters out in the Pacific are also going to be a large driver in some of these outlooks. And unfortunately, they do all indicate some very hot weather to be possible across the central plains kind of early on here. This would be in towards July. And that's what we're reflecting here. We have an extremely above normal look here for July. I think it's potential to be one of the hottest Julys we've seen. And now this would leave areas across the west coast a little bit cooler. And there is going to be, you guys will note as I walk through July, August, and September, that there is overarching here, there is a consistency or a persistence pattern to where this heat sets up. There's some minor variations here, but overall this is a pretty consistent persistence pattern. In terms of the precipitation here, let me go ahead and get the drawing tool out for this. I think there can be cases where we try to work some flow in here. It'd be around this ridge. It almost looks circular. I know in the weather term we talk about ridges of high pressure here, our big blue H's we see on weather maps. That this is the ridge that's going to hold that heat. And what happens is we get a lot of storm complexes or potential for some severe weather to work over these. We call these almost ridge riders. They like to go right around that high pressure. And so the concern with this here is this area by and large is looking to be above normal, but due to these being almost cluster-like in nature, I think some spots can still miss out on rains in here in the above normal spot. But at the same time, the counter to this is there can be a case where you can get a very heavy blast of rainfall with some stronger storms here. And another thing to measure with this is if we do see some severe storms, that obviously can be detrimental to some of our crops. It can damage some of the crops. But I think that threat for that, some of the severe weather, is going to be in the area I circled in red here. And then as we get more into late July into August, this with time can lift north, and we can get some flow here for some stronger storms. I think that's very well possible and in the cards here. So by and large, I think the ag belts, it's looking above normal for rain. Can there be some spots in here that just get unlucky and miss out on some of this? I do think it's possible. And then you can, in turn here, have a period where you get hit by quite a few clusters of storms. Some can be severe, and you can get wet for a period in time here. Let me switch back to my laser pointer. I gotta erase some of this stuff here I still got over the temp map. Not sure if that's going to carry on to the next slide here, so bear
Will,
with me.
I got a question for you while
Yeah,
you're doing that. And I'm thinking, and maybe this is backing up just a tad, but I'm really thinking
yeah.
about the northern plains just a bit, and the amount of moisture that's come over the last month. And there's, yeah, which is a good thing, right? But I know lots of guys are trying to get planted. We work particularly a lot with the folks that are doing no-till and reduced till, and there's sometimes some of the concerns is just trying all that residue on the surface that you don't really want when it's wet in the spring, but come mid-July when it turns hot and dry, you're just glad you have it. So I didn't know if you had any, kind of the progression, maybe in particular that area over the next 4 weeks to 6 weeks on, is it okay to kind of hold off on working that ground? Are there any windows of opportunity to get, still get seed in the ground if they haven't, and able to save that residue for when they need it later this summer?
Yeah, so my first thought with that is they've actually it's been wet there, but they've actually, I mean, some spots actually in South Dakota here and kind of the western high plains, these spots have been actually drier. So I think if the farmers got out there and they planted really the past week or so, I think they're sitting in a very good spot, because my concern is I think, again, we talk about having this ridge that's sitting here into late June, early July. What this does is we can see some active flow. I'm going to draw this up here so it might be a little bit easier to see. We can see some active flow. This is called southwest flow of just above normal precipitation. So my concern is they've gotten that rain. If your fields are wet right now over the next 4 to 6 weeks, I do overall see this continuing to remain more active than not. So that maybe you can run into some issues, at least at the start here, where it can be tough to plant if your fields are already wet. But in turn, I think kind of down the months from now, if it's going to be getting very hot from a budget point of view, I think this actually may be a good thing. So it's just something we're going to have to kind of measure the good versus the bad here, kind of over the long term, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Uh-huh. So let's go ahead here. I'm going to jump into the analog years. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these, just more so to give comfort for support. Like, we're not just making things up, Here's a look at those analogs. It's very, very hot. We went with two approaches here. The top, the smaller images, they're important. They hold significance, but this is more of a conventional approach. And then once we factor in that those cooler Pacific waters off the west coast here, that PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation I was talking about, these are kind of more of what we're after. So I've just kind of included these smaller ones as a supplemental piece to it. But we can see, again, the precipitations, it's dry in here across the Central Plains. The only thing that the analogs may not see or capture very well is that idea here where we work in some of this flow over the top of that ridge. And there can be cases where on that southeast side here, this is what's called return flow. We can work in some moisture across the southeast and some of these cotton areas here. It really ultimately depends on where this ridge, this high pressure sets up. And I'd say from a temperature point of view, we feel very confident in that. Like, this is going to be quite hot. It's just some of those small minor details there in the precipitation. So I'm going to go ahead here, guys, and I'll jump into the August outlook here, and we'll kind of mirror that here, go into the analogs and go from there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the August outlook, and really from July, that core of extremely above normal heat will expand more towards the north and east. I think the Great Lakes, kind of Ag Belt area, and the Ohio Valley, probably sometime late July, early August, things can get quite hot there. And then once averaged out here, I think the corridor to monitor in August is going to be the Great Lakes and portions of the Northern Plains here. That's why I was speaking to, from a budget point of view, if things get very hot at the end of the season, I do think it's actually beneficial to be a little bit more wet right now from a budget point of view across the northern ag belt there in Iowa and Minnesota. And again, as I noted here, and what our team's looking at, this could be another potentially record warmest August. It's just the analogs look very hot. The data is very hot. Now, again, I think that the temperature here is it's higher confidence, and there's that persistence as well. Warmer in the east, so some cooler temperatures hang out along the west coast. In terms of the precipitation, there are a couple of some things we need to take with caution here. For one, we have more of an active tropical outlook, and August, September, October is where roughly about 70% of that tropical activity occurs. And as well as the analog data here, we'd have to watch for some tropical systems. I think that's possible. And when that happens, that can cause, for one here, we already have the ridge still across the eastern U.S. This can cause another moisture rob across the central plains. So that's another issue here that we're going to have to contend with working forward. The one risk I can see to this that I did not mention on this map actually is I think it'd be kind of the southern half of this above normal corridor. My concern is kind of at the beginning of the video, we talked about this shutting off. I think it's possible, depending on how much this heat places or how much it goes northeast, that some of this can dry out across August, and that may have that risk of ending our growing season a little bit earlier if we can't get some substantial precipitation to work through there. And in turn, what I can see happening here is perhaps this kind of this northern half, if you will, of this above normal. I think this can shift a little bit more up through here into the Canadian prairies and portions of the upper Great Lakes. So again, I do think if we're across central Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan here, we still see some flow in there, but there's just concerns that this can dry out some. Now, what's limiting to this, and we have to respect it, is just the data. What is the analog? What does the data suggest here with this? And these are all wet. A lot of these years are wet. Even if I was looking at these kind of in specific, we have most recent climatology. These are all, or 21 and 22, if you will. These are La Nina years. And then we talk about 16. 16's been a very top year for our analogs. Those are all wet, and so it's hard to go against that idea. So trying to combine both of those, we evidently see there's flow that's working through the ag belt here again, but we see how hot this is through here. It's a matter of can some things shut off through here. That's what we don't have finalized yet in this forecast, and that's kind of the general thinking with this kind of rolling forward for right now. Another thing I can see being a problem as well is if we do get tropical systems that work through the Gulf, this can also rob moisture from the cotton areas. So that's something to watch for. And then again, on the flip side, another wild card is if we get systems kind of off the page here, if we're in the Atlantic, if we get some of these tropical systems that come up the East Coast here, wherever those place, that can still give you rain, and it only takes one tropical system here to really kind of mess that up. We can get a tropical storm there that can dump down 3 to 5 inches in 48 hours, and then that can kind of skew a monthly outlook. So those are just some risks to watch out for here across August, and it's hard to know exactly when a tropical system is going to happen, but if we at least know it's a hyperactive or a much above normal season, those are some risks that we're going to have to watch out for here. So let me again go ahead and erase this, and we'll jump into September here. Oh, here it is. Actually, I got ahead of myself. This is the tropical risks here. Should we get no tropical systems that hit the U.S.? My apologies. We can see there's that dry risk there across the East Coast. And again, look at how wet that data is. That's what we're dealing with here, where there's some uncertainties. We see the dryness across the Central Plains, and if we don't feel any tropical system hitting the East Coast, the Gulf, 22 and 16 were the only two pure years that saw that with no tropical activity out of those other analogs I showed. And so that would be a warmer risk across New England, actually warmer risk across the Northwest. So a couple of things to balance out here rolling forward as just some risks overall. So let's go ahead and get into the September here. And that's kind of working off a little bit of that August idea. We went with the idea here. Again, the data is wet across the Gulf Coast. If we get some tropical systems in here across September, that's going to be one, a moisture rob across the central plains, even the northern plains, and then again here across the east coast. And now again, I have to mention, if we get a system that's along the east coast here, I mean that can flip this. But overall, from what we're seeing in our analog years, and I will end with the tropical stuff here in a moment, that it does look more favorable to see systems tracking through the Gulf. And that's kind of more of the weight into this forecast. Again, I think the easier component, or the higher confidence, if you will, is that these locations continue just to remain very warm. I think September is very warm. Recent climatology supports that idea. And the last thing I'll comment too with the below normal here, this is where, again, I think from a budget standpoint, if we stay very active into July and August, this may not be too much of a concern if we dry out here into the end of their growing season here. I know we're talking northern plains here, it's cooler a lot quicker, and this is September at this point, but it just averaging all that out there, I do think it's looking very good there across that region for getting out there and having good yields on our crops. Let's go ahead and look at some of what the data suggests here from our analogs. We are still pretty far out here. If there's a risk, I think unfortunately things can trend even warmer across the lower Ohio Valley. Just another very hot month. We see the same years popping up here, 16. I threw in 05 and 07. These are more tropical influences as well, especially 2005. That was a very hyperactive season, and that can be in the cards. There's potential for that. The Atlantic sea surface temperatures right now, they're very warm. We're well ahead of pace with that here. We haven't seen any tropical systems yet, but again, August through October is when things are very active in that realm here. And there's a look at the precipitation here with this. If we can get some flow up the Gulf Coast here, if we do have a tropical system, it'd be a dry risks here across the eastern U.S. There's that idea of some drier risks across the central plains here, northern plains, if we do see some systems. And those do factor in a little bit of that idea. We had Katrina there in 05, some stronger hurricanes are possible. It's something we have to watch out for, and those can throw off the precipitation corridors a little bit there. So it's trying to, again, balance some of that in there to get kind of the best outlook rolling forward here. I'm going to close things off here with our official Atlantic hurricane season outlook. We actually are in the hurricane season right now. It runs from June 1st through November 30th. But again, the main thing I want us to take away from this is the occurrence of these systems. Notice from August 1st through really about mid-October, that's where we see most of our tropical activity here. So I think I noted here about 70% of that occurs from August 1st through October 20th. So here we are really June 10th, and there's not much going on right now. That's typical. And in terms of our forecast, this is the ideas here in the orange. We think there could be some above normal activity across these Gulf regions, and if that's going to be our more favored corridor, that's going to suppress things to see more of systems tracking this way along the East Coast. That's not to say that can't happen, but overall, this is what we're favoring more of. And in terms of a named storm point of view in hurricanes and major hurricanes, this is an extremely above normal season. What we would call this in kind of the weather lingo is a hyperactive tropical season with 21 to 25 named storms. I do think we very well can go through the entire alphabet down our name of storms. That's happened a few times. It happened in 2020. I believe it happened last year. We had to go to the Greek alphabet because we have so many named systems. I think it happened in '05 as well. Again, those are the 3 times I think to my memory that it happened. And typical major hurricanes, we see about 2 to 3 per year on a normal basis with about 12 named storms here. And usually within that you see about 4 to 5 hurricanes. So this is going to be a very active season ahead. Our top year, again, from a tropical standpoint, continues to run with 2016. If we're talking a sea surface progression, 2020 is the ticket from there, and 2020 was very active. And then some other years to flow with that, we see 2005 pop up, 2010, 95. 98 came out of a strong El Nino from 97 into a La Nina here. And then '07 is also a loose one to consider. So that's how we're shaping up in terms of the tropical outlook. And again, that makes things a little bit interesting when it comes to trying to get a precipitation outlook. But overall, that's kind of what we're dealing with here over really the next 3.5 months.
Yeah, thanks, Will. That's yeah, a lot of good stuff there. And as I'm thinking kind of about the we have a large subset of growers kind of in the Central Plains, even Southern Plains, and I'm just maybe more of a just calling out the obvious is there was a lot of warm, dry overlap over the next 3 months in the Kansas, Southern Nebraska, Oklahoma area. And I'm thinking, just the Kansas folks that are, really the only spot in the country that's in drought now, other than, a few pockets of maybe Florida and others. And so just kind of thinking about what they might be dealing with now on, early dry conditions, and then what maybe to expect over the next few months, especially for those dry land acres that might not be able to have, irrigation pop on, or maybe not enough water to pop on and keep up through that type of heat.
Certainly, yeah. I think by and large, if I were to do kind of let me redraw this here, just an overall assessment where I think we can see the highest concerns out of our ag areas, it's going to be Oklahoma, Kansas, perhaps southern portions of Nebraska here, and maybe southern portions of Iowa and Missouri. From that budget point of view, we're a lot of Kansas is in a drought right now. If we get this extreme heat to work in here, there certainly can be. What I do like about this is I think early on, again, this is very near term. We're talking into June and late June, we can try to get some flow in through here, but that window is very short. And my concern is just we don't get much of a reprieve from that. It's hot in July, it's hot in August, it's hot in September. You add in some of those tropical threats there for some of the moisture robbery to take into account. I think if there's a most problematic area this growing season, it's going to be those 2 states. I think the cotton areas, I know we touched on that a little bit. It's a little more of a wild card in my opinion. Again, when we're considering some of those tropical threats, we'd have to see, 1, if we see any tropical systems, 2, where they go exactly. And with our standpoint right now, I think it's a case where it's near normal. I again think there's cases again in July and August where we get some of these clusters. How far can they work into these areas here? I know these are very cotton dense areas in the Carolinas, and tobacco products there too. That's some things to measure, but if there's some dry problems, I think that comes up into August and September, and we can get some flow in there in the short term. In terms of the ag belt, I think it's pretty close to near normal as well. And again, that risk would be things shutting off a little bit earlier in the growing season, perhaps come August. There can be some concerns for that. It's still a little ways away, so I don't want to be married to an idea with that yet, but that's just a risk. And then as a whole, just from where we are now, a budget and rolling forward, in my opinion, I think it's going to be very good for our crops here across the Northern Plains and perhaps the upper Midwest here for corn, and I don't know a whole lot about the soybean density up through there, but there's some soybeans up there too that I certainly think near term here, actually in June, with things across the high plains, it's going to be more seasonable. I do know that the soybeans kind of like some of that there. You certainly would know more on that stuff than I would, Tyler. But as a whole here, I'm kind of rambling, but as a whole, I think Northern Plains is going to be the good spot this year for our growers.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like they can get anything in that's left out there. Things will look up, and August will make or break soybeans for a lot of folks. So we can hope for some moisture to continue at least when that heat comes in August. So that yeah, a lot of good stuff though. Yeah, very interesting forecast. A lot of good things going on. I really appreciate you putting this together for folks and kind of look at where they're at, because every farm's a little different, and everyone kind of takes a little bit of info and might have to adjust it for where they're at and what they're doing. But yeah, I really appreciate the big picture, and really thanks for the time. And I'll kind of just remind everyone, we can find this info as well as others at BayerForGround.com. Again, we're really happy to work with BAM here to really kind of try to bring you up to the date, unique information that you can't just find anywhere. So happy for that. So Will, maybe any last comments?
Yeah, on our side of things here at BAM, if you guys are interested in what we do, you can go to bamwx.com. We do have our own app platform that's called Clarity Weather. And with that, there's a little chat feature where you guys can interact with us 24/7, one-on-one, and just chat with us about what could happen at your operation. You can look at the 10-day forecast. Hey, I see it's dry. What's going on here? Or let us know what you guys are doing, and we're trying to do anything we can, again, to build that relationship and help folks out to get the maximum benefit on whatever their operation is. So go ahead and check some of those things out there. We got some nice tools for you. Again, that's at just bamwx.com, and you can see some details there with what Clarity can potentially do for your operation. And
All right.
again, I want to close, Tyler. Again, thank you as always for your time here, for this partnership. It's awesome stuff here, combining the like ideas and rolling with these here. It's a true pleasure. It's very fun to do these.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, thanks again for the time and the helpful info. Everyone else, happy end of planting, hopefully for most of you, and then off to the summertime. So thanks again for the time, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.